Hi guys, welcome back to lecture. Today we're going to kind of piggyback off of chapter 6, analyzing your audience, and take it a bit further into adapting to your audience as you speak. Now some of these things we touched on in our chapter 6 lecture, but we're really going to try and expand upon them here in chapter 7. So be sure that you have read chapter 6, watched the chapter 6 lecture video, and now we're taking it further again with chapter 7. So our objectives here are to explain how to read nonverbal cues to understand listeners' reactions to your speech. So basically, as a speaker, we have to be very kind of cued in to what we are doing as a speaker, our facial expressions, our eye contact, our movement, our posture. But then we also have to be aware of how our audience is reacting to our message and our delivery style. Next, guys, we'll talk about describing several adaptations you can make to respond to listeners' nonverbal cues. Then we will list several ways you can customize your message to your audience. And then lastly, we'll discuss strategies for adapting to diverse groups of listeners. So we'll start here with nonverbal cues. So reading nonverbal cues, first of all, we always want to make sure that our audience is really locked in and clued into our message. And the main kind of giveaway of that is eye contact. So here I have a picture of a guy that's kind of just looking up into space and really just avoiding eye contact with a speaker, hypothetically, right? And then over here we have two people that are just locked into eye contact, enjoying the message, have no discrepancy there with whatever the other speaker is saying. So noticing if you have a lot of audience members that are avoiding eye contact with you, or if you have audience members that are very locked in. And sometimes, guys, you might have the majority locked in on you, and you might have a couple that are just not into it that day, and that's okay. We'll talk about finding our target market, our target audience, and we really want to try and keep the majority of our audience on par with us, but knowing you might have a few stragglers, you can't typically reach everybody. But we're going for this really engaged eye contact. Facial expression, I have two extremes here. One guy that's like, woohoo, you're doing so awesome, and the other guy that's very angry. So you typically won't have this broad of a spectrum in your speech. You're rarely going to have people that are just really going for it and giving you props during your speech. And you really will rarely have people that are super, super angry, I would think. But knowing that you can kind of see in people's facial expressions if they are giving you a positive facial expression, maybe a little bit of smile, at least kind of bright-eyed, along with their eye contact there. And then also always recognizing if you see a frown, which we'll talk about here in a second, could be confusion, could be anger, and you'll have to kind of think about that in relation to your message and the situation. Also, movement and posture. So I think posture is the biggest one that you'll notice kind of in the public speaking class setting because your audience is sitting. But typically, speakers that are very engaged move very little, so they don't fidget or lean from side to side or sit on their hands or anything like that. They're not laying back like this guy over here. That looks very inattentive. They're usually leaning forward with their hands down. If you see people that are like this, I found people that don't even realize they're doing that, and they might even be engaged, but this is typically kind of a lazy listener. So as a listener, take that into account. I know this is a very common thing, and knowing that your audience or your speaker might pick up on that, and it's better to just lean forward and be attentive. In terms of nonverbal responsiveness, in some settings people might clap or say, I agree, or something like that. Typically not within our public speaking class setting, but in other public speaking situations. So if you have those claps, you know that you're doing well. You may also ask how many of you have done this. And if people are just immediately raising their hand, that's probably a good sign. If they are a little bit hesitant, maybe the question makes them uncomfortable. So you might have to position that question differently, ask that question differently, talk it out a little bit. So these are all things that we are really looking for in our audience members. So taking it out of ourselves and knowing that what we're doing as a speaker in delivery because we've practiced and prepared, and then really picking up on those things from our audience members as well. As an audience member, then kind of flip-flopping that and being aware of how you are reacting and looking to your audience or to the speaker at that given time. Then if we talk about responding to nonverbal cues, so you might think that your audience is bored, so you might pick up on Again, someone leaning back, someone maybe even closing their eyes. And then what do you do in those situations? Maybe you talk a little bit faster. Maybe you break and have a little bit of a discussion. Maybe you really go back to the audience and provide some more examples to give them a reason to listen and position the topic in their lives. Confused, you might slow down a little bit. You might provide a different way of explaining things, a different example. Disagreement, that's where you kind of backtrack a little bit, maybe give the audience another connection, again, another example, even the playing field again, start back over, review a couple things. That goes for confused as well. So just how you are approaching giving your message, should you be receiving these nonverbal responses from your audience. And as always, guys, we want to customize our message to our audience. So I have name drop here, and I mean this in a very positive way. So maybe you ask someone in your class if you can reference them in your speech. Or I've had students that will give similar topics on speech day, which is fine, but maybe they then just reference that other speech on that day and kind of throw that in extemporaneously to say that they agree, or they're going to offer other examples, or maybe they disagree and here's why. If you're speaking to an organization or group, you're trying to really positively reflect and engage with that group without being overdone and fake, because your audience will pick up on that. So always being very genuine, very positive if you choose to name out audience members or reference specific groups or organizations. A specific reference ties again here, but it might be to an event, it might be to recent news. So always we're uniquely designing our message to specific audiences. And that means we're going to think about our demographic both physically, psychologically, in that certain context, in that environment, and thinking about what facts, what statistics, what examples, what metaphors, what descriptions will this audience really relate to. So your examples will be very different that you would use for middle school, high school than what you would use in a business setting, right? So again, just thinking about how can I best fit this message to this specific audience. So you might be sharing the same message, but if you're with a different audience, you're going to have to adapt and probably change your examples, your positioning, your references. So a few examples here, guys. If you were to give a specific reference, say you are giving a speech in New York City, and you gave a specific reference to New York City and talking about 9/11. So that also ties to a significant event. Maybe you are outside of New York City, but it's around that time period, around September 11th, and you're talking about a very serious topic that affects a lot of Americans. Maybe you would reference 9/11 in positioning the impact of your message, right? Recent news, maybe you're Googling and looking up news related to your topic so that you can bring those in and make the topic very current and very relevant. So just a couple examples there to help you think about customizing your message to your audience. So we'll finish up here, guys, talking about adapting to diverse listeners. And basically, in its essence, diversity just means differences, right? And we know that our audiences are very diverse. So even in our specific classrooms and our specific groups of public speaking, we have people from very different backgrounds, very different ethnicities, regions, all those things. So we need to make sure that we are kind of bringing the audience together on our topic and recognizing those different influences that might play into how our message is decoded and taken in, right? So our book talks about identifying a target audience and knowing whether your audience members come from an individualistic or collectivistic culture. So I have this image over here that says me or we. So individualistic cultures are very focused on the individual person, and that takes precedence over the culture or the group that they're in that specific instance. Collectivistic cultures, on the other hand, really value the culture or the group, the family as a whole. So knowing, is this person just in it for me? Do I need to specifically target the needs, interests of that person? Or they have a more collectivistic nature where targeting the culture, the group, or their family and influences on that family might be more effective. And obviously we don't want to stereotype or generalize too much there, but it might be just a simple addition to your survey asking whether or not the topic influences them heavily, or if it influences the family, the culture. Again, maybe it influences that larger group more heavily, and you want to take a more collectivistic lean. Then we need to know high or low context. So our book here says high context listeners pay closer attention to a variety of nonverbal cues than low context ones who will focus mainly on your words. So in getting to know your audience members, you might see, do they pay more attention to your nonverbal cues, or do they rely more heavily on your verbal cues? And that might even be going back to how you present your information. Maybe you really focus on how you're structuring your language, and then tying into all audience members by delivering in a very enthusiastic or in a way that matches the tone of the topic. So if you have a very upbeat topic, you're delivering very enthusiastically. If you have a more somber topic, you're matching your tone of the tone of your delivery to your message. Tolerance of uncertainty and need for certainty. Again, here your book talks about this very well, and it says people with low tolerance for uncertainty need your speech to be clearly organized and may prefer a linear step-by-step structure. So taking into account how your audience will process the message and whether or not you need a lot of detail and structure in your message, or if you can kind of break it up with stories and those kinds of things. High or low power, guys. So people from high power culture relationships are likely to perceive people in leadership roles as credible. So basically the hierarchy within that communication situation is very, very clear. People with low power, it's more of just an even playing field. So again, guys, just recognizing what type of audience you're dealing with and adapting your message and your delivery style to that audience. Lastly, here we have long-term or short-term time orientation. So long-term orientation, your audience is out to achieve a more long-term goal, so willing to wait and take the steps to get to that long-term goal, looking into the future. Or a short-term time orientation where you're very much ingrained in the here and now. And I would say this really ties to the context of your message and the topic. So maybe it's something that needs immediate attention. Maybe it's something that is going to have to take some time, and there's several steps included in getting towards your goal. So adapting to diverse listeners is pretty complex, but it's something that we can do as long as we're taking that time to really survey and get to know our audience and learn from our previous speeches. So by speech 4, hopefully your relationship with your audience and your knowledge of your audience is pretty clued in. All right, guys, if you have any questions at all, please send me an email, and I'll see you soon for our next lecture.